Hey everyone, I'm Crystal Jagrup, and this is Empowered by Women. In August of 2021, I launched Book of Bijou, which is a line of chic and innovative jewelry storage. And in January of 2022, we expanded into what you now see as the Empowered by Women platform. I really wanted to create a centralized space where we can really put emphasis on our mission of women empowerment and community over competition. It really truly does fill my cup to be surrounded by so many of you inspiring women, and the energy that you bring to me and our platform on a daily basis is unmatched. You really all do fuel me with so much motivation to continue doing what I'm doing, and for that, I thank you for being a part of our community, for joining me here today, and just for the ongoing support. I really cannot express how grateful I am and how much it means to me. So again, thank you so much. Before we jump into the episode, please be sure to follow or subscribe to us wherever you are listening, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. And also don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your fellow female founders so that we can continue growing our platform and furthering our mission. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this next interview with another incredible woman in entrepreneurship that I know you guys are going to absolutely love. Today, we're being joined by the incredible Jessica Dawson, who is the founder of Empowered for Sales. Jessica, I've had the opportunity to listen to a few of your most recent interviews the past few days, and I am so excited for this conversation because you have so much wisdom and insight that I'm like dying to dive into. So first of all, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, and thanks so much for having me, Crystal. I'm a fan of your work and everything that you do to help women and empower them. So I'm thrilled to be here as well.
I appreciate that so much. So let's just dive into it. Empowered for Sales, that's almost kind of like a brand new business, right? But tell us about what that is and how your journey has led you to that moment.
Yeah, great question. And it is a newer business. And what led me to starting it is I actually started off as a stockbroker in my career as a stockbroker for about 10 years. And it was back in 2008. Some of you may remember the fall of Lehman Brothers when it was collapsing, and I was actually working for the company at the time. And it was a catalytic moment for me because I did see talent being squandered. I saw a lot of layoffs and I saw just brokenness in the organization. So I ended up going back to school, and then for 10 more years, I was a learning and development consultant. So teaching, coaching, speaking all over the world, talked a lot about talent and employee engagement and all of these things. And when I went to start my independent coaching business, one of the things that I wanted to do was bring all of my worlds into one. Right. And so I have had an opportunity to coach some of the biggest sales leaders, some really large entrepreneurs and business owners. And there's something about the entrepreneurial space in particular that is so interesting and inspiring to me because it's a spiritual journey. You're tested, you're tried, like all of your limits are pushed, and you need a coach, And so every professional has a coach when you think about Olympic athletes, et cetera. And for those of us that are on this journey of entrepreneurship, self-employment, right, you're no different. And then the other thing that's interesting is that the word sales has a really negative connotation. So the empowerment around that is for us to take that word back, because if you're in the space of entrepreneurship or business ownership, you are a salesperson. You may not realize that that's what you stepped into, but that is what you stepped into. And I want to be that person that really allows people to find their gumption and their agency in any situation to push past and get to that place of triumph. So that's how that's how I started it, and I'm really excited about taking on the clients that I've taken on so far and what it's going to morph into.
I love that so much. And I love how you mentioned that you were so like aware of all of this. I think you said talent being squandered and all these people that were being let go. And you recognized that potential and that light in everyone. And it wasn't being, like utilized to their potential, and they weren't giving that opportunity to grow. They were, kind of just like fell by the wayside because of everything that was happening with Lehman Brothers. So that's very similar almost to, it's very aligned with what we're doing with Empowered by Women. Obviously, our focus is women, whereas yours is executives as well as entrepreneurs. But it really is giving that power back to these people and letting them see that light within themselves and what they can do to really step into that power and create that path for themselves. So I want to kind of dive into, the fact that you do encompass both all of these high executives in these larger corporations, and you also work with these, entrepreneurs that have smaller businesses. I would love to know, like, what have been some of the key differences that you've seen between the two, and also maybe, what are some of the really big similarities?
Oh, really great question. The similarities would be the piece that us as human beings, we get in our heads a lot. And so usually, and I've coached C-suite level executives, I've coached first-time managers, managers that have been in the game for a long time as well, and they still get in their head because they're still human beings, and we all have that negative self-talk that can sometimes spiral in the downward direction. It can also spiral in the upward direction. But what I have found in terms of a pattern is that a lot of times what I'm coaching around is just that, as well as relationships. So entrepreneurs, it'll be more so around networking, and some entrepreneurs that I work with, they do have a small team, so it's relationship building within that capacity. And then with executives and managers and leaders, the relationship piece is around, like, actually, how do I manage up, manage down, manage across? And it's a lot to navigate. So relationships mindset. I would say the biggest differences would be with entrepreneurs, especially for those that are in that solopreneur space or they're newer in their business. I mean, the rat or the elephant in the room is always like the money and like the worry that can sometimes come if you're not hitting your goals, if you're not hitting your sales targets, right? And so sometimes with entrepreneurship, the mastery pathway around prospecting, that road can get difficult, it can get tough because you've got to figure out how to master it in your own way, and what worked for you is not going to work for somebody else. So I would say that that's probably one of the bigger differences that I hear from entrepreneurs. And then the other piece is, how do I niche down, especially for those that are transitioning out of corporate America? It's a different game. And so, yes, it's great that you have all of this experience, but you've got to take the stairs like everybody else when you step into entrepreneurship. And there's not really the room for the elevator. And sometimes when you work for an organization, you're representing that name and that dream that has been built for sometimes 20, 30, 100 plus years, and you're stepping in under that name versus you building your own name. So, there's a big difference as it relates to that. And then the pressures of corporate America, they're there, they still exist, but a lot of times it's more so around, how do I show up in a boardroom in a way that I'm respected, right? How am I making sure that I'm handling conversations, or if I have to fire people or have difficult conversations, that'll come up more on the executive track than on the entrepreneurial track.
There's so much that you just said that I want to pick apart every little thing that you're saying and dive more into it.
Yeah.
But I love the focus on that relationship mindset, because regardless of where you are, right, whether you're in corporate America or you're in the entrepreneurial world, building those relationships is so key. Having those relationships and knowing how to work with people and build that kind of environment where it is very engaged is so important, to know how to really interact with these people and focus on the strengths. I know a lot of things that I've been reading and hearing from your ends from past interviews is really focusing on your strengths and your talents and finding that in other people as well, to build that really engaged and effective work environment or culture. So what are some key factors through your experience with, working with all of these people, that entrepreneurs that maybe are leading a team already or potentially, working with clients, what are some key factors that they can really pay attention to and hone in on to build that more engaged and effective team or client relationship?
Oh, for sure. There's this famous saying that the fallacy of communication is that it actually happened. And it's because we're all speaking our own micro languages. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you've started to hire folks on your team, the best thing that you can do is spend more time than you think you need to on setting expectations. And usually, when it comes down to setting expectations, the tactical or the explicit expectations are a lot easier to set. So that would be like the timelines, the deadlines, right? What are those tactical elements? What usually gets missed are the implicit expectations. So they're the things that you're making assumptions that this person knows. You haven't actually talked about it, but you're making that assumption and then you get disappointed or there's a rub within the relationship. So I always encourage people to spend at least anywhere from 1 to 3 hours just around getting to know that person, how they work, explicit expectations, implicit expectations, which, by the way, if you're not as sure about what those are, think about what your best workers have done or what it looks like for you to go above and beyond in a specific task. Start with the end in mind and then reverse engineer. Right. So that's a way to really cover your basis and be really thorough. But expectations is like the biggest rub that I see, especially with like a manager to employee or even an entrepreneur to an employee that I've just hired. And then you're disappointed, and there's like all of these butting heads. So you want to spend a lot of time there. And you want to get into the space of curiosity. That's the other thing. So you want to ask a question and then you want to listen. That sounds like a very like thing that people should know. However, usually when we go into a conversation, we're more passively listening or we're listening for that person to stop talking and we're not really dialing in. So whatever you need to do to minimize distractions is important. Set the expectations, and then at a minimum, and research has shown this, that one meaningful conversation a week with a direct report is a game changer as it relates to like engagement. So a meaningful conversation could be a point of praise. It could also be a piece of feedback. It could also be just you brainstorming with that person or you asking that person how they're doing, how are things going, right? And you'll get a lot of intel or database or data points in terms of how do I need to adjust my style to honor how this person is showing up for work. So those would be like some of my best practices. And more often than not, when there's a rub, it always comes down to expectations.
I love that quote. It was mentioned in one of my recent episodes. I think that, the biggest misconception about communication is that it happens. That is just so true. And I was literally thinking on the way back home this morning from the gym, I was thinking about how much of a proponent I am for telling people what you need. We really need to get that assumption like out of the way and just be, direct, of course, respectfully direct. But yeah, getting that feedback. I was recently promoted to a management position within my day job, and so everything that you're saying is things that I've been putting into practice these past few months, and I have been really being mindful of really encouraging the feedback of my team and not only just saying like, yeah, we're open for feedback, because there are some people that just say that but then they don't really value it, but I do really value it, and you do want to kind of dive into it and digest what they're saying and figure out where all those like key opportunities hidden within their words of where you can improve.
Right.
So all great advice. You also mentioned networking, and that is a really key thing for especially entrepreneurs that are just getting started, starting to build those relationships. Your network is your net worth is huge for me. But there's that hesitation, right? That moment where, or I guess it's probably not a moment, it's like a lifetime journey of trying to build that confidence. But what are some of your key tips for not only networking, but building that confidence? It's almost like going back to your executive, example where
Mhm.
you're walking into a boardroom and you're trying to pitch yourself. But for entrepreneurs, they're going into a networking event and they still have to kind of do that same thing. So what's your
Yes,
advice for going into that room, owning that room, having that belief in yourself, and really building your confidence?
totally. It's such a great question. And I think that everything always starts from within us. And I'm such a big believer that life is not happening to us, it's happening through us. Right. And it's just a mirror. And so one is, I don't know if some of your viewers or listeners might be familiar with Mel Robbins, and she talks about this notion of like the high five and getting
I
into the
love the
mirror.
high five method.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that really does work. And she's done a lot of research on that. So the high fiving yourself in the morning and just like pumping yourself up, or you becoming your own best hype person. I'm such a huge just believer in that. And then the other piece I will say is that if you were to ask your younger self if it's hard to walk when you were like less than one, you probably would say yes. But now, if you were to ask yourself today if you're able and is it hard to walk? It's no. So there is this roadway to mastery in anything that you do. And so part of it too is giving yourself a little bit of grace and doing networking enough to get to the phase of mastery, right? And we all start with something called unconscious incompetence, where it's like you're in this place of fumbling, you're trying to figure it out. What does this mean for me? And then you get to the phase of conscious incompetence, right? Where things start to get a little bit easier, but that's usually the phase where people will quit. When something's hard, like excitement is what's driving your adrenaline when you start, and then you get into it and you're thinking to yourself, oh gosh, this is actually really hard. Your body will actually have a reverse mechanism of like you looking for ways to not do that activity, right? But if you can push back past unconscious, conscious incompetence, which is the phase that most people quit, you'll start to see success and you'll start to get into unconscious competence. And then finally, you'll get into conscious competence, and that's mastery. And so a lot of people don't know those phases, but in anything that you're doing, that you're looking to get to excellence, you're looking to get to mastery, you actually have to go through those phases. And you failing at something, or you experiencing maybe a fall on your face moment, not literally, but you feel like, oh gosh, explore the learning within that interaction. What did you learn? Because next time you go out and do it, you're not going to make the same mistake. So you just got to get your reps in. And that's the case with sales as well. How do I prospect? This is really hard. Let me make this sandwich. Let me organize my closet. But you should be prospecting if you're not at a place where your business is where you want it to be. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I've never heard it broken down into those four steps with the subconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, and then going into the competence. So that's really cool to kind of like think about it that way. And I love that you mentioned that, like in those failures, like what can you learn from them? I had like a whole video about this, like just like don't even think about it as a failure if that scares you so much. Everything is a learning opportunity. You
Mhm.
did it, you tried it, it might not have gone your way, but
Mhm.
it's still one step closer to figuring out all those little things that you can adjust to get to the success that you want to achieve. And it's about that discipline to keep showing up and that persistence to keep showing up when the first few times didn't go so well,
That's right.
right?
Oh,
Because
so well
overnight.
said. So well
um,
said. Yes.
I I love that like I said, I was listening to a couple of your interviews before this, but there was a moment where you said, I think when you made the decision to become a learning development consultant, I think with Gallup, you chose to go down that path because it scared you the most. Break that down for us.
Yeah. Oh, so, up until that point, I had been in mostly sales roles, and even I was hired at Gallup into more of like a BD capacity, more of the partner track. And when we went through a reorg in like 2015, and I got tapped on my shoulders for a few things. Learning and development is a different space because it's very different from having to do a 1 hour sales call versus a 4.5 day class, which is what I was stepping into. Oh, and by the way, I did not have a learning and development background. I didn't go to school for this. So yeah, I had a lot of internal training and I had to study a ton, but it is intimidating. And I was also on the road about 75% of the time. I could be resourced anywhere in the world. And so it allowed for me to become a universal player, but standing at the precipice of it, it was pretty daunting to think about, oh, I have to go in and do an executive presentation on, I don't know, employee engagement numbers, or I have to go in and teach at a university, right? So they really threw me into the fire. And so that's why it scared me the most. And at the same time, there's like this wisdom in our bodies that all of us have that pull us towards activities and away from other activities. And for me, I had always been in a space where I was coaching, mentoring, teaching. I just didn't give it that label. It just came so naturally to me. I didn't really understand that that was my calling until I actually stepped into it. And so there's something, actually, earlier today, someone told me fear and excitement feel the same. And they do. So if you can just continue to tell yourself, I'm really excited about this when you're fearful about it, it can allow you to kind of push past, right? Those limitations that I could have easily fallen back on. Well, let me just do this role because I'm familiar with it. But there was something about that role that I just couldn't not do it, So I took the plunge and here we are.
I love that. And again, I believe in that 100% also. All of those little things that scare you the most, that's where your growth lies. Just open the door, be willing
Yes,
to step into the unknown a little bit, and that's
that's
how you'll
right.
grow. And that's where all of the excitement is. Like once it's like past that little hump of like, this is kind of scary, but it also is very, very exciting. So I love that little advice to just be like, I'm so excited. I'm so excited for this opportunity, even though, it scares you. It is really exciting to open yourself up to the possibilities of your
Mm,
potential, really.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So another thing that I saw, I think it was on your website, again, you focus a lot on, talents and strengths and really utilizing that and to push yourself forward. So you refer to talents as neurological advantages.
Mhm.
Obviously, people don't go around and talk about like, I'm so neurologically advantaged. So break that down for us.
Totally. Yeah. So the beauty about talent is that we all have it. There's this saying that I love. It's a fish is the last to discover water. And that's how close we are to our talents. It's very much like the bridge of our nose. So it's our natural way of thinking, feeling, behaving that you can productively apply, right? So it might be, I'm someone who really loves to storytell. So I could storytell, and that might not necessarily be in a productive capacity, but you could also see how, if you're a natural storyteller, you can monetize that. That might be a way for you to encourage and inspire other people, right? So when we talk about a neurological advantage, it's something that you are wired to do, and you first need to understand what that is. Once you do, then you just have to harness it so that you can apply it and to get the outcomes that you want to get to. But we all have them. So it's pretty cool. And they usually show up in our quirks or in our idiosyncrasies. So it might look like I like to keep a to-do list, or I can always figure out the plot of a movie, or I can, or I love pushing the elevator button to remind the elevator that I'm still waiting. All of these things are actually clues that there's a talent kind of driving that behavior. And for a long time, I studied the talents of other people, and so now I can actually pick up on people's patterns. And I do that in my coaching because I can start to understand your talents and how you can apply them to be more successful as an entrepreneur or as an executive.
That fish thing is so interesting. I don't know if it sounds kind of familiar, but I don't know if I've heard it. The fish is the last one to discover water. And it does ring so true. Like oftentimes our talents and our strengths are so obvious to everyone around us. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like we're either, refusing to believe it or we really just don't see it.
Yes.
And it kind of goes back to like your coaching thing. Like you were kind of just subconsciously doing that for all these people and you didn't realize that that was your calling until much later. And I think that that is very common for especially, entrepreneurs. So there is something that you are pretty familiar with, the Clifton Strengths Assessment. So what are
what are the pros of doing something like that if you're not quite sure what your strengths are? What is the real draw and advantage of taking one of those structured assessments and getting that kind of official feedback?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love the way that you phrased like just one of those structured assessments. They're called, and I do kind of nerd out on this stuff, but they're called psychometric analyses. There's so many that exist on the marketplace, such as Clifton Strengths or Myers-Briggs or DIST, et cetera. There's a couple of reasons why I really think that Clifton Strengths is just um, a cut above. Okay. So the first is just the granularity of the instrument. So the chances of someone having the same top five in the same order is 1 and 33.3 million. So it's not just your strengths, but it's actually the unique makeup of your strengths because no strength stands alone, right? So you get to understand as opposed to like what neighborhood do I live in? You'll understand what's the furniture that's in my living room. That's how granular it is. And when you take your report, it's a starting point. So some of these analyses, they kind of put you into buckets, but this has more of an openness for you to claim who you are. It's also a developmental tool. So your report is just a starting point. And as you continue to have conversations, usually with a coach, you can take that report and continuously unpack it for the rest of your life. And I took that assessment back in 2012. But since then, I've coached and led people through it. And particularly um, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an executive, and you are having a rub from a relational perspective, it can be a relational shortcut to be able to understand another person's language, right? Like, what's that micro language that they're speaking? What's their motivations? How do I encourage, inspire them? It can give you a doorway to have those conversations much more robustly because you still want to stay in that place of curiosity. We never want to prescribe people, but it can be such a game changer. So I highly encourage Clifton Strengths, or if there's another assessment that you're thinking about, that you're gravitating to, just do it. Like you can't really go wrong.
I feel like I'm just learning so much from you, and we've been talking for like 30 minutes or less. Psychometric analyses is a new phrase for me. I wrote that down, so that's something that I've definitely taken away moving forward. And I love that you are, enforcing that it is just a starting point and it's not a prescription, right? It's about
Mhm.
building that curiosity, even if it's just for yourself. And you
Yes.
mentioned unpacking it. So what do you mean by unpacking it?
Yeah, for sure. So usually I'll have encourage people to go through the reports and like read, highlight the words, phrases that really resonate with you, and then start to think about, go beyond, some definitions on a page with some strengths, and think about how it applies to your real life. How does this show up in your business, or how does this is this showing up for you within your role? Right? How is it showing up for you in the way that you build relationships and the way that you're able to influence or galvanize other people and the way that you're able to get things done and the way that you're able to think, process, absorb information because it speaks to the how you'll get to where you need to go as opposed to what you will be doing. So they're all role agnostic, when you think about strengths and it allows for people to see themselves in a way that maybe validates them. And then sometimes people do have surprises, but you can start to transcend your lens because your strengths are like a lens in which you see the world. But you can actually start to transcend that and understand other people's lenses. And that's when things start to take off for executives, for entrepreneurs in really unique and fascinating ways.
That's powerful. And then I think also kind of just diving a little bit more into it and really giving yourself that time to understand it and relate it to your own life. It's kind of like that thing where you like there's this car that you want to buy, and the more you think about it, the more you see it, the more you see it on the
Yes.
street. That's the same thing with
Yes.
your street. Like you might be you might get this report that says these are all your strengths. These are where like, you should focus on and really work on highlighting that and find a path that's aligns to these little key factors. And you might not have believed it before, but the more you dive into it and the more you start relating into it, you might start building that confidence, like you're right. I am so strong in all of these key factors, and this is what I should be doing.
That's right.
So I can definitely see. I don't know if I know the name, but I don't know if I've ever actually taken the Clifton Strengths Assessment. So it's something that I'm
Oh,
definitely gonna look
yeah.
at.
Let me know if you take it. I'd love to know what your strengths are.
I'm so curious. So for those that don't have that unwavering faith in who they are and what their strengths are, what tips do you have to overcome that?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things or places that you can start. I say you want to get super curious about yourself. And a great way to do that, like, yes, you can learn a lot through your failures, but when you do what's called a mental rehearsal and you start to think about those moments of success or even moments where maybe you helped other people, start to reflect on those moments. What did you like about them? What was the outcome? And maybe just even journal, or if you're more of a voice talker, do some voice memos. You can start to hear the patterns of who you are, what you naturally gravitate to. And so I'm a firm believer of studying yourself. When are you most confident? Right? What are those moments? Are there patterns in that? How can you recreate more of those patterns? Because sometimes, and we all do this as humans, where we might blanketly say, I can't do that, or I'm not this. But if you really go back and study, there's usually some inclinations of you having had success in that vein, but maybe you just didn't see it. So the mental rehearsal thing is something that I highly encourage people to do. Also, whenever you do a mental rehearsal, it puts you into this place to problem solve and to also ideate. So you can start to see your way out of difficult situations if you're finding themselves in them. So mental rehearsal would be one. I think the other thing to do is to start to pay attention to the stories that you tell yourself, because as human beings we also love the stories. So what are the stories that you're telling yourself? And I know mindset has become more and more popular. So what is your mindset? And can you start to catch yourself as you're having more of those downward spiral story moments? Because you can tell a new story and that new story will be reflected in your life. So let's say I'm not confident and I've got to go to a networking situation. Tell yourself that you are confident, or tell yourself that you're going to get through this, or tell yourself that there's a great learning waiting for you on the other side of going to that networking opportunity. So get into your own head and be intentional about the thoughts that are running rampant inside of it, right? And then third, pay attention to the people that you have around you. Most business books will talk about like and you just said it earlier, your network is your net worth. All of those things are so true. If you're around a lot of naysayers, a lot of negativity by osmosis, you will become more negative. And vice versa is true as well. If you're around a lot of positive people, if you're around a lot of go-getters, if you're a new entrepreneur, like having a great support system and network, all of those things are so important, because those energies can actually permeate into you. And sometimes, especially if you have high empathy, that's actually not my stuff, that's your stuff. you know so those would be my three kind of things to start with, and be gentle. Fourth would just be give yourself a lot of grace as you are going through the process. Don't be so hard on yourself, because sometimes that's the other thing we do. We're so hard on ourselves.
I love everything that you said. We're nearing our time here, but I want to dive a little bit more into Empowered for Sale. I know it went by so fast, but since you're brand new, obviously there's, I'm sure, so much exciting things right above the horizon. So what can you share with us in terms of all of that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of cool things that I'm working on. I have a book coming out next week, but it's a book chapter. So I'm a part of a compilation book. It's called Voices of Impact. It should be out at around Mother's Day. And it's my first time kind of diving into the book world, but I'm super excited to be a part of this book. And we're all talking about stories of impact. So that's what my chapter is on. So definitely feel free to check that out if you'd like. And then the other thing that I'm excited about is just I have done a lot of speaking, but it's fun to start speaking for my company, So going down to Atlanta next week for an event, connecting the dots, and I'll be talking all about empowerment, sales empowerment. So come out and check us out if you're around. It's April 28th.
That is incredible. I would love to attend one of your events one day. So where can everyone find you if they want to connect with you?
Oh yeah, and here's the thing. I would love to connect with you. So on socials, I'm on IG and TikTok, Empowered for Sales. And then LinkedIn, Jessica Dawson, you can find me Empowered for Sales. I'm on there as well. And then if you wanted to shoot me an email, I welcome that, Jessica at empoweredforsales.com.
Love it. And of course, all of that will be linked in the bio. Jessica, I literally could feel like I could talk to you all day. You are incredible. And this went by so fast, and I'm kind of bummed out. But you've been amazing. You have so much insight to share, and I know our audience is going to love it. So thank you so, so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Crystal. This was so fun.
Another incredible interview with yet another inspiring woman in entrepreneurship. I hope you guys loved that episode just as much as I did. But before we leave off, if you yourself are also a woman entrepreneur, I would love for you to consider joining our Empowered by Women directory. We're looking for women-owned product and service-based businesses in the US to help us build the go-to place for our communities to find local women to shop with and connect with, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. All of the details can be found on www.empoweredbywomen.com/apply-directory. Of course, that's going to be linked in the show notes below, and you're also welcome to reach out to me anytime if you have any questions. But other than that, thank you again so much for joining us, and I will see you in the next episode.